Hey guys, Tim Russell here from Multipart Finance, and in this presentation I want to give you a bit of a finance market update to see how things stand as we're at June 2019. Now before we do that, if you haven't heard of Multipart Finance, we're a small mortgage broking business based in North Sydney, and a little scope is escape the maze. And that's because the typical clients that we deal with are mainly wealth creators, people looking to grow their wealth through property, and when you do that, there tends to be some sort of finance hurdle that needs to be overcome. Our job is to identify what that issue is and provide you with a clear map to allow finance to be an easy part of your wealth building strategy. Now, just to recap before we talk about where things are at, we've obviously have now come through a full market cycle with a bit of a property boom, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne. This graph here provides, what all major markets have been doing for the past 10 years. But basically, if we look at the dotted grey line, Sydney probably links to most media articles about the property boom that we've had. And at around 2016 is where the market has peaked, and it's since come off significantly since then. Now, from a finance perspective, the reason for this change has been, in my opinion, due to heavy credit changes, and it has affected the property market since. Now, in this graph, if you take a look between April 2015 and 2017, this is the key indicator for the finance guys about what happened with the market. So basically, the black line is investment housing and the blue line is owner occupied. Now, if we take it back, another 30 years, you would see that owner occupied purchases tend to be the majority of the market. It has historically been 2/3 owner occupied, 1/3 investment. But in around the end of 2015, APRA, who's the regulator of the finance industry, saw that for the first time in a long time, well, not the first time, but there was a significant increase in the amount of investment purchases going on. They said, look, this is an artificial market brought about by low interest rates and overseas interest in the property market. And so they've since tried to work hard to change bank policy to bring that back to what the historical norm has been. You can see the effects that they've had here. Investment lending, since these credit changes have been in place, has dropped significantly. Owner-occupied lending has increased, and now they've got the gap that they wanted to get from making these changes. Now, if we look at what those restrictions were, just to recap, what APRA did at the time was they said, we're not going to have any more than 30% of all new loans be interest only. Most people, when they get an investment loan, they tend to get interest only because the interest is tax deductible, and because there was more properties being purchased as investments, APRA was concerned that these loans would never get paid off. The other thing they did was they said, look, we're going to cap investor growth to be no more than 10% of a bank's book. So banks had to look at their data every month and make restrictions either to increase interest rates or to lower LVR policy to stay within that cap. And the other thing they did is they said, we're going to apply an assessment rate of about 7.5% across all loans that you have. What it was pre-APRA was the loan that you're applying for, you had to get a pass assessment rate, but then all other loans that you had, the bank just took the actual repayments. Overnight, this halved a lot of people's borrowing capacities, and we've had this difficult credit issue since. If we look at what these changes did on the markets, the data's come through now. We can look at the two things APRA were concerned about was interest-only loans and investment loans. Now, if we look at this graph from the top to the bottom of the market, before the APRA changes came in, interest-only loans took up 45% of all new loans. Now, they only make up 16% of all new loans. So to say that these changes were effective is an understatement, in our opinion. Now let's have a look at what's happened with investment loans. So over the past 12 months, investment loans are down by 27%, but similar to interest only, from the peak of the market to where we are now, it's 52% lower in terms of new loans coming in for investment loans than it was at the peak of the market. So again, we're at this stage where the market has completely cooled due to these changes that APRA have put in place. So let's talk about what's happened recently, and there's been a huge amount of change that I want to talk about in this presentation. The first big announcement was the Liberal government retaining power. throughout the campaign, Labor was heavily favoured to win the election, but for whatever reason, the Liberal government's got up, and it meant that the Labor proposed changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax are not going to go through. Throughout the Royal Commission, there were significant changes to the mortgage broking industry, my industry, but none of that's going to happen now. And because of that, it's now brought about stability, with many experts now predicting, and the data's coming through, that where we're at now in the property market is probably the lowest point now. So we're now at the true bottom of the market, with things to pick up over the next few months. Now, in terms of APRA, they've removed their caps on interest-only and investment loans, so we don't have those same restrictions anymore. Now, what we're seeing, therefore, is, in my opinion, we're going to start to see the gap between interest-only and principal and interest reduce, and also the difference between owner-occupied and investment loans reduce. We're not going to go back to what we had pre-APRA, which was the same rate regardless of what structure you're at, but I think the gap's going to lessen. The graph on the left shows that, I guess at the start of the year, the gap has never been so big, but mark my words, you'll start to see this decrease over the next few months. Already you can see, I just pulled some of the cheapest rates I'm seeing out there. So for investment interest only now, Resimac are doing 4.09, Macquarie doing 4.24. That's the lowest that I've seen probably for 12 months. So, a much more favourable condition for investors moving forwards. We've also recently had an interest rate reduction on the cash rate. So we're now at the lowest rate the RBA has ever seen since they've been pulling their data. This takes you back to the 60s, and it's always good to recap. I look back and I talk to my parents about how interest rates were in the 1980s and 90s, being at 17%, but we're now at the lowest point in time the market's ever seen. Now, in terms of APRA, again, they're now discussing the way that they're going to be changing someone's assessment rate. So before, it has been that all loans that you've got need to be assessed at 7.25% minimum, and many banks are going higher than that. What they're looking to do now is to have a new system where whatever rate you're applying for, the bank will just apply a 2.5% buffer. Now, the data that we've seen on doing those numbers, it's probably going to increase people's borrowing capacities by about 30%. If we just take a look at this table here, this sort of shows you different ranges about what people can borrow pre and post APRA, and it's about roughly a $50,000 to $100,000 difference, depending on whether you're a couple with kids or a single person. So whilst it's not significant, I think it's going to be enough to ignite the markets again, particularly across Sydney and Melbourne. So we'll just have to see how we go. But anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below, or if you want to get in contact with me direct, my contact details here are in the slide. So thanks again for your time, and have a good day.